The rope was never meant to end her life. It was meant to make her listen. Eliza Moore felt that truth before she understood anything else, before the bark scraped her wrists and before the river's sound grew louder than her thoughts. The men worked quietly, with the patience of people who believed the land already belonged to them. They lifted her just enough that the ground slipped away, just enough that breath became work instead of instinct. Fear settled in her chest, steady and cold, and she knew this moment had been planned long before she ever walked down to the water. The oak tree stood wide and calm above her, its branches spreading like open hands. It had shaded her land since before she was born. Her father had once told her that trees like this remembered everything. As the rope tightened, Eliza wondered what this one would remember, her silence or her refusal. One of the men stepped close. His voice was smooth, almost kind. "Miss Moore," he said, as if greeting her at a fence line. "This doesn't need to go on. There's paper waiting. All you have to do is sign." She tried to answer, but the words came out thin. The rope wasn't cruel. That was what made it worse. It allowed her just enough air to think, just enough time to imagine losing the land. The river diverted. The soil cracked and pale. She thought of mornings when the water caught the sun, of work that mattered because it was hers. That was what they were trying to take. Not her breath, but her future. Her hands moved without permission from her mind. Fingers searched for weakness in the knot, for rough fiber that could be worried loose. The men noticed, but didn't rush her. They had learned patience from watching people break slowly. Farther up the valley, a horse picked its way along the river path. Nathan Brady hadn't meant to come this far that morning. He told himself that as he rode, the thought repeating like a warning he chose to ignore. He had left the law behind years ago, left it the day he realized rules only mattered when the right people cared. Since then, he kept to his ranch, his fences, his quiet. Trouble belonged to other men now. Then he saw the figures beneath the oak. Nathan slowed before he understood why. The shape of a person hanging just wrong beneath a tree didn't belong in a peaceful valley. His chest tightened, the old instinct pulling him forward even as his mind argued to turn away. He had learned what helping cost. He had paid for it once already. Eliza's vision narrowed, the river blurred. She focused on the bark inches from her face, on the smell of damp earth. Somewhere, a horse snorted. The sound cut through her fear like light through cloud. Nathan dismounted before anyone spoke. The men turned, surprised but not alarmed. They recognized him. Everyone did. One of them smiled, polite as a neighbor. "Morning, Brady," he said. "This doesn't concern you." Nathan didn't answer right away. He took in the rope, the height, the way Eliza's boots barely missed the ground. He felt the old anger stir, the one he thought he'd buried with his badge. "Cut her down," he said. "That wouldn't be wise," the man replied gently. "Our employer wouldn't like it." The name wasn't spoken, but it didn't need to be. Victor Raines didn't have to be present to be felt. His reach lay in the rope, the calm voices, the certainty that this valley belonged to him already. Nathan stepped forward anyway. The man reached for him, then stopped. Something in Nathan's eyes made the choice for him. Nathan pulled his knife, not fast, not threatening, just certain. The rope gave way with a soft snap. Eliza fell into his arms, light as fear makes a person. Nathan lowered her carefully to the ground. She coughed, drew air, and the world rushed back in. The men backed away. They didn't argue. This was only one move in a longer game. Nathan helped Eliza sit. Their eyes met, strangers bound by a moment neither could forget. He knew, as he stood beneath the oak, that walking away now would follow him forever. The valley was quiet again, but the silence had changed. The house at Brady Ranch sat low against the land, built to face wind and weather without complaint. Nathan Brady led Eliza Moore inside without saying much, as if words might draw attention they didn't need. He set her down on a wooden chair near the table and poured water from a tin pitcher, watching her hands as she took it. They shook at first, then steadied. She drank slowly, every swallow a reminder that she was still here. Nathan kept his distance while she caught her breath. He had learned that some moments didn't need fixing, only space. Outside, the valley stretched quiet and wide, the kind of quiet that could fool a person into thinking nothing bad ever happened there. Nathan knew better. Quiet often meant people were watching. Eliza finally spoke. "They weren't trying to end me," she said. Her voice was rough but steady. "They wanted me afraid." Nathan nodded. "Fear moves faster than the law." He set a clean cloth on the table and motioned for her wrists. The rope marks were dark but shallow. As he worked, Eliza watched his face, looking for judgment, for questions he hadn't asked yet. There were many, she knew. Why she'd been alone by the river. Why men had felt bold enough to do what they did. Why she hadn't already left the valley. She answered before he asked. "It's the water," she said. "The rights tied to my land. They run deeper than what's written on most maps." Nathan paused. That word, water, changed the shape of the problem. Land disputes came and went, but water stayed. It fed crops, animals, towns. Control it, and everything else followed. He had seen that truth play out in other places, always the same way. "Victor reigns," Eliza said, not looking at him. "He wants it without paying for it." Nathan finished tying the cloth and stepped back. He had expected the name. Everyone in the valley knew who held power, even if they pretended not to. "He doesn't ask," Nathan said. "He waits." Eliza gave a thin smile. "He's been waiting a long time." She told him about the papers she had refused to sign, about surveys that shifted lines overnight, about neighbors who once spoke kindly and now crossed the road to avoid her. The water under her land fed the river even in dry months. It kept fields green when others turned brown. Rains wanted that certainty. He wanted it quietly. As the day wore on, Nathan noticed movement on the ridgeline beyond the pasture. Riders, far enough to blend with the land if you weren't looking for them. He didn't point them out at first. He didn't want Eliza to feel hunted again so soon, but he doubled his checks on the fences and kept his rifle closer than usual. By evening, the ranch felt less like a shelter and more like a line drawn in the dirt. Eliza sensed it too. "They're watching, aren't they?" she asked. Nathan didn't lie. "They always do." She stood at the window, looking out at the fading light. "If I leave," she said, "he gets what he wants." "And if you stay," Nathan replied, "he'll keep pressing." The truth sat between them. Helping her meant inviting trouble back into his life. Nathan had built this ranch to escape men like Rains, to live by work instead of threats. Yet as he watched Eliza stand there, bruised but unbroken, he felt the old weight return. The weight of knowing what was right and choosing whether to act. That night, unfamiliar riders lingered at the edge of the valley, close enough to be seen, far enough to deny purpose. They made no move, said no word. Their presence was the message. Brady Ranch was no longer neutral ground. Nathan stepped onto the porch, the wood creaking under his boots. He met the darkness head-on, hands resting easy at his sides. He told himself he was only protecting his land. But he knew that wasn't all of it. By opening his door to Eliza Moore, he had reopened a chapter he never meant to read again. Inside, Eliza lay awake, listening to the sounds of the ranch. She understood now that refugee came with a price. Safety was temporary. Silence was what Rains counted on. And somewhere beyond the hills, the watchers waited, patient as the men beneath the oak had been, certain that time was on their side. Redville looked the same as it always had, which was how it kept its secrets. The boardwalks were swept, the windows clean, the flags still hanging from their poles like nothing in the world had shifted. Nathan Brady rode in beside Eliza Moore just after midday, the sound of hooves drawing more attention than either of them wanted. Conversations slowed. Faces turned, then turned away. Eliza felt it first. The distance. People she had known for years nodded without meeting her eyes. A shopkeeper paused before opening his door, then pretended to adjust a sign until she passed. Fear moved through the town quietly, the way water slipped beneath doors. Nathan dismounted and tied his horse. He had walked these streets before with a badge on his chest, when people had looked at him with expectation instead of caution. Now he felt like a stranger in a place that once trusted him. He wondered how many of these people still remembered why he left, or if they preferred a simpler story where he was just another man who quit. They stepped into the sheriff's office together. Deputy Howard Klein stood behind the desk, neat as ever, sleeves rolled just right. His smile came easily. "Nathan," he said, warm and familiar. "Didn't expect to see you back in town." "Didn't expect to be," Nathan replied. Klein's eyes moved to Eliza. "Miss Moore, I hear you've had some trouble." Eliza held his gaze. "I did." Klein nodded slowly, as if weighing something delicate. "Gee, these things happen when folks misunderstand paperwork. I'm sure Mr. Raines would be happy to clear it up." Nathan felt the room tighten. Klein wasn't denying anything. He was smoothing it over, turning threat into confusion. It was the same method Nathan had grown tired of enforcing years ago. "We're not here to misunderstand," Nathan said. "We're here so it doesn't happen again." Klein's smile didn't fade. "Best way to avoid trouble," he said calmly, "is not to make it public." They left without filing anything. Outside, Eliza's hands were clenched tight at her sides. "That's it?" she asked. "He won't even write it down?" Nathan shook his head. "Writing it down would make it real." As they crossed the street, a man leaned against the hitching rail, watching them. Luke Harper didn't hide his stare. He looked younger up close, his hat worn thin, his posture stiff with uncertainty. He worked for Raines. Everyone knew that. Still, when his eyes met Eliza's, something shifted. "You all right?" Luke asked her, the question quiet, almost careful. Eliza studied him. "I was," she said. "Before." Luke nodded, as if that answer carried weight. "Town's not what it used to be," he said, then fell silent, as if he'd already said too much. The emotional shift came later, when Eliza stopped at the old schoolhouse on the edge of town. The door stood open, dust drifting in the light. She stepped inside alone, memories pulling her forward. She had learned to read there, learned to write her name on paper that meant something. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, telling her that land was responsibility, not power. Nathan found her there, standing still. "You don't have to do this," he said softly. "We can leave." She turned to him, eyes clear. "If I leave, I teach them this works." Nathan felt the choice settle heavy in his chest. He remembered a case from years back, when he'd followed orders instead of his gut. A man had lost everything while the law stayed clean. That was the day Nathan Brady stopped believing silence was neutral. Back on the street, Luke Harper watched from across the way. He saw Klein laughing with a merchant, saw how easy it was for the town to pretend nothing was wrong. Luke had taken the job for steady pay, told himself it was temporary. But seeing Eliza walk past the people who once shared her table stirred something he'd kept buried. That evening, as Nathan and Eliza prepared to leave town, Luke stepped forward again. "Be careful," he said, not meeting Nathan's eyes. "Not everyone here is blind. Just, not everyone's brave." Nathan studied him. "You make your choices," he said. "Same as the rest of us." Luke nodded, the words landing harder than he expected. As they rode out, Redville closed behind them, unchanged on the surface. But something had cracked. Eliza carried with her the knowledge that the town's silence was a decision, not an accident. Nathan carried the weight of stepping back into a fight he once abandoned, and Luke Harper stood alone in the street, caught between the comfort of obedience and the cost of doing what was right, knowing that before long, he would have to choose. The decision was made before either of them said it out loud. The papers could not stay in the valley. Keeping them hidden only delayed the same pressure that had already followed Eliza to the river and to Brady Ranch. If the truth was going to matter, it had to travel farther than Victor Raines expected. They left before sunrise, taking the narrow mail road that cut through the mountain pass. The air was cold and clean, and the path was quiet in a way that felt uneasy rather than peaceful. Nathan rode ahead, scanning the bends and rises, while Eliza carried the satchel close to her side. Inside were copies of surveys, deeds, and water records, dry pages that carried more weight than any threat spoken aloud. Neither of them spoke much. Words felt unnecessary. Every sound carried farther up there, and both knew they were not alone, even if no one showed themselves yet. The road tightened as it climbed, rock walls closing in. That was when the riders appeared behind them, just shapes at first, then clearer as the distance shortened. Nathan did not turn. He adjusted his pace, steady and calm, as if this were just another ride through familiar land. Panic would only invite mistakes. Eliza felt her chest tighten. She thought of the oak tree, of how patience had been used against her. This time, she refused to let fear decide anything. "If they stop us," she said quietly, "don't give them the papers." "I won't," Nathan replied. "That's the one thing they can't have." The riders closed in, but did not rush. They matched speed, close enough to make their point, far enough to avoid open confrontation. One of them called out, friendly as ever. "Long road to be carrying important things," he said. "Would be a shame to lose them." Nathan finally turned his head. Mail has a habit of reaching where it's sent. The riders laughed softly, not amused but patient. At the narrowest point of the pass, they moved closer. A horse brushed Eliza's stirrup. For a moment, everything balanced on choice. Push harder and risk exposure, or let time do the work. Nathan made the choice for all of them. He urged his horse forward, forcing space where there was little to spare. The sudden movement broke the careful calm. The riders fell back just enough to avoid trouble they didn't want witnessed. When the road widened again, they were gone. Eliza exhaled, only then realizing she'd been holding her breath. They could have taken them. "Yes," Nathan said. But then the questions would start. By the time they reached the next station, the danger shifted. The pass was behind them, replaced by routine and rules. The postal office stood solid and plain, a place built on schedules and records. Eliza handed over the satchel, watching as the clerk logged it without curiosity. That simple act felt heavier than the threat in the mountains. From there, copies moved on separate routes. Some went by rail, others by coach. Nathan made sure none of them knew where all the pieces were going. Raines had always counted on control, staying local. This was different. Days later, in the larger coastal city, the papers reached desks where names like Victor Raines did not carry the same quiet power. Officials reviewed records without fear of being watched at the market or followed home. Questions were asked. Requests were made. Lines that had been shifted too easily began to draw attention. Back in the valley, Raines felt the change before he saw it. Messages took longer to return. Assurances sounded thinner. His influence had always worked because it stayed close, wrapped in familiarity and silence. Now the silence was breaking apart, carried away by official stamps and distant eyes. Nathan and Eliza did not stay to watch the first results. Their part was finished for now. As they rode back toward the valley, the road felt different. The danger was still there, but it no longer belonged only to them. Eliza understood something she hadn't before. Raines didn't just control land. He controlled what people believed was possible. Sending the documents away had done more than protect paper. It had challenged that belief. Nathan felt the weight lift just enough to breathe. He knew this would not end quietly. Power rarely let go without resistance. But the fight had moved into the open, where patience and silence worked against those who relied on them. When the valley came back into view, both knew the final test was ahead. The truth was no longer hidden. It was moving, spreading, and gathering strength. And Victor Rains, for the first time, was reacting instead of waiting. The gathering did not begin with shouting or anger. It began with curiosity. People came in small groups, drawn by word that something important was finally going to be said out loud. They stood near the river, beneath the same oak tree that had once been used to frighten a woman into silence. The tree looked unchanged, its wide branches steady against the sky. But the space beneath it felt different. Open. Exposed. Eliza Moore stood near the trunk, her back straight, her face calm. Nathan Brady stayed a few steps behind her, not guarding, just present. He knew his role now was not to act, but to witness. The power in this moment did not belong to him. Victor Rains arrived as if nothing unusual were happening. He wore the same confident expression he always had, the one that suggested he was doing everyone a favor just by showing up. He greeted people by name, his voice smooth, polite, reassuring. "Good to see folks taking an interest," he said easily. "That's what community is about." Eliza watched him closely. This was the man who had relied on quiet threats and patient pressure. Out here in the open, those tools meant less. Nathan felt the tension ripple through the crowd as the documents were brought forward. Not waved dramatically, not forced, simply presented. Copies laid out on a table where anyone could see them. Survey lines that didn't match. Records that had been altered too cleanly to be coincidence. Water rights traced and retraced, leading back to one pattern. Rains smiled, but his eyes sharpened. "Paper can be confusing," he said lightly. "That's why folks like me help make sense of it." "That's true," Eliza replied, her voice carried without effort. "But paper also remembers." The crowd leaned in. Some people frowned. Others shifted uncomfortably. This was not how things were usually handled. Disputes were meant to stay quiet, settled behind closed doors. Bringing them into daylight made everyone part of the outcome. A murmur ran through the group when a familiar figure stepped forward. Luke Harper removed his hat and held it against his chest. His face was tight, his voice careful. "I've carried messages," he said. "I've watched lines get moved and folks pressured to agree. I told myself it wasn't my concern." Rains turned to him, still calm. "Luke," he said, almost kindly, "you're mistaken." Luke shook his head. "No, sir. I'm done being mistaken." The silence that followed was heavy, but it was no longer empty. It was full of attention. Rains spoke again, but his words landed differently now. They sounded like excuses instead of explanations. Nathan watched the people of the valley look at one another. He saw something he hadn't seen in years. Not anger, not fear, responsibility. The oak tree stood above it all, unchanged, no longer a threat, but a witness. Eliza felt the weight of the past loosen its grip. She knew this moment would not fix everything. Land disputes would continue. Power would shift and resist. But the silence that had protected Rains was broken, and it could not be put back together. Rains stepped back as questions rose from the crowd. He had no rope, no quiet corner, no patience left to rely on. For the first time, his control slipped not because of force, but because people were watching. As the gathering slowly dispersed, Eliza remained beneath the tree a moment longer. Nathan joined her. Neither spoke. Some victories didn't need words. The river moved on, steady and clear. The valley breathed easier, and long after the crowd was gone, people would remember this day, not for what was taken, but for what was finally said out loud.